The Nova Scotia lobster industry has lost almost $77 million this spring and summer compared to the same period last year. China imposed tariffs are taking their toll on this province's seafood sector, and there are concerns about what's next, especially for lobster markets. Kris Vascotto is the executive director of the Nova Scotia Seafood Alliance. This seems to be, a pretty big number here in terms of a loss, close to $77 million. But how big is this for the industry? Can you help us put it in perspective?
Well, to be honest, this is a fairly substantial chunk of lost business that we're experiencing going into China. I mean, when you look at it, a loss of 65 or 70% of your sales to your major client, who represents about 40% of your customer base over the course of several months, is incredibly substantial. What that actually translates into on the ground is that you have inventories that have been established planning to service this market for several months. And when the market pulls back, you're forced to look at that fresh inventory and make decisions about where you're going to put it. That might be an alternative customer, and it might be an alternative use for the product.
And so, what do you see happening with that marketplace?
Well, I think in the near future, you're going to see us starting to look at other trade partners that we have. Some additional product will probably flow to the European Union, to the Indo-Pacific region, down to the United States as well. You will also see some of that product that was being considered to be held for the live market actually move into the processing sector. I can assure you that none of the product is going to be lost. It's just going to find a different home, and associated with that different home is going to be a little bit more of a cautious look as we look to what's going to happen in the fall season unless some of this is resolved. I've been having conversations on a regular basis to say, well, this is where we were in the spring, and here's how we responded. How are we going to deal with this in the fall when we're dealing with such incredible uncertainty as to whether our clients are going to be interested in actually purchasing the product or not?
Yeah, well, do you see this situation leveling out anytime soon? I mean, there's been such an effort to build up that market in China over the years with how many trade missions. Is that work lost?
That's an excellent question. What you do, or what we do, is we look back and we say it took us 12 to 15 years to actually establish the current market position that we have in China. And that market for a live product now represents about the same size as the other dominant trade market, which is the US. So as soon as you start to actually see these kind of shakings of what's actually happening in the marketplace and this pullback of the North American lobster that's coming out from Nova Scotia, you will see the Chinese customer begin to put other pieces of wild fish and seafood on their plates. They have ample opportunity to rock lobster out of Australia. They have various other crustacean species that they can bring into their tanks, and they can deliver them live to through their same logistics chain. So the longer that this actually persists, the higher the likelihood that we may permanently lose that market position that we worked so hard to be able to gain. That's part of the reason it is so important for us to be able to find a rapid diplomatic solution to be able to resolve these trade crises and actually open up the market again such that we can begin feeding that market before we lose it forever.
All right. So, in the meantime, are any of those attempts to find new markets proving to be that fruitful?
Well, there is some success that we're seeing. I can tell you that in June we actually experienced a little bit of a bump actually in markets outside of the U.S. and China. At the same time, every other market around the world is really dealing with the same global economic headwinds that we're actually dealing with here in Canada. And lobster occupies a very unique position in many of those markets where it's a top tier premium piece of seafood. Anybody who has actually had a freshly caught cooked lobster can understand just how wonderful it is. But because it is a highly priced item, consumers worldwide are kind of starting to step back and reevaluate where they're going to be finding that premium protein from. So we are looking at some recovery in some of those other markets. We're seeing increased interest in other Indo-Pacific markets, which is excellent. But really, at this point, we have not seen anybody step in to be able to take the vast amount of volume that China was able to take in that live market.
And so, is there any telling at this point to what degree that might affect price?
There is no indications yet. I mean, as anybody can tell you, that the price of lobster is dependent on demand and supply. Right now, we're seeing a little bit of a flagging in demand, but we still don't know what's going to happen to supply. We could find ourselves starting in the end of November, early December in Southwest Nova Scotia, where we have a very slow run of landings. And of course, if we have a slow run of landings, that's going to elevate the value throughout the supply chain. If we find ourselves in a position where we have very, very healthy landings like we had several years ago, that will have the opposite effect. What we're hoping to see is that we can actually see this trade dispute resolved, and we can see China re-enter the market with some degree of uptake. And if that happens, that'll give us a bit more certainty on where the solid price is going to be come the beginning of the fall seasons.
Okay, and in the meantime, how much will that $80 million that was announced this week by Prime Minister Mark Carney help the tariff-stressed industries? How much will it help yours?
That's the really big question here is how are we actually expected to access that $80 million? There was a broad array of qualifications that required considered for it. At the same time, there's a bunch of different programs that it could be marketing, it could be innovation, it could be automation. And we're also sharing that $80 million with every other impacted sector in Atlantic Canada, including multiple impacted sectors within the seafood trade. We're just speaking about lobster here today, which runs about 76.5, $77 million in losses in the last 4 months alone. If we start expanding the scope to include things like cold water shrimp, whelk, any number of species that we're shipping not off into China, that number gets magnified pretty quickly. And we're not the only ones experiencing these challenges. So we can really only hope that this 80 million is really the start of a program as opposed to the end of it. Because once the industry begins to access it and realize how they can access it, I think you're going to see it get picked up pretty quickly, not just by the seafood sector, but by every other impacted sector in Atlantic Canada.
Lots to watch for sure. Kris Vascotto, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.